Okay.
Yeah.
That's why Matthew should.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be great. I heard some people wanted to come but couldn't, so this will help.
Okay. I'll forward you the recording.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Great.
And there's your son. Oh my God.
The prodigal son.
Huh? Just
And there's Ellen, and there's your son-in-law. You see him?
Hi, Evan.
Hello, everyone. Hello.
Hi there.
That's Rabbi Moffic, my son-in-law. I'm so proud.
Oh,
And rightly so.
Where's Ari? I don't know if I've ever seen her. Is she there?
someone's got to watch the kids at some point, and I've been
Oh, geez.
that duty. Yeah,
Go watch the recording.
yeah. I'm going to send it to her right away. So
Okay, good. You should. You should.
It's nice to see everyone.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Thank you for being here.
Where is everybody? I mean, are you guys scattered all over the country?
I guess I could record.
Yeah, I'm in Chicago.
Hey, Evan.
Yeah, hey, Jen. Nice to see you.
No, not to record it, just to come.
Oh, no, I thought you come Monday. Just, we're starting. Just
Does he know how to come?
Okay.
Have we seen Steve yet?
Yes, Steve is there. Say hi to
Oh, hi,
Steve.
Steve.
Hey, Dan, how are you?
Good, thanks.
Good.
Hey, Jim. Nice to see you.
Hi, Evan. How you doing?
Good.
Hi, Steve.
Rusty.
Rusty.
Hey.
Hey.
Almost
Rusty, why don't you get a chair? I mean,
I am, but I'm off stage.
sit on his lap for the time being.
No.
Will you? No, you won't.
So is RODEF doing, how is this working? You have weekly classes like this? What's the structure?
No. So we generally have days of learning twice a year where we do about 10 programs. But this is what's called a pop-up. This is something brand new that we're trying.
Okay.
Just one day. We did a grandparenting program at 4:15, and now we're doing this class. And there were over 60 people signed up for this class. So we're thrilled
Wonderful.
with the participation.
Wonderful.
Hi, Stan.
Hi, how are you?
I'm okay. How are you feeling?
How are you?
A little sore, but otherwise good.
You look excellent, in my opinion.
Muriel, you were terrific earlier. Muriel was on our grandparents panel.
I thought, I didn't even know what I said. I got nervous. I
You were
was
terrific.
And Muriel, your granddaughter, the cakes that are fantastic.
I don't think they showed the inside of the
They
checkerboard.
did. They did. It was.
Oh, okay.
Oh, the inside of the yellow cake we saw. Not,
No, but the inside of the other one is, it's
Oh,
a
a
checkerboard.
Oh,
Yeah, I was so sorry Candace didn't put it up. I don't know why that happened. She had it.
Yeah, because 16 is a square number, so you could see the square. Well, anyway,
how old is she again?
she's 14 and a half.
Amazing. Wow.
Yeah, she did that restaurant school cooking camp a couple of summers. It's like 2 weeks in the summer. Do you know the restaurant school? It's on Walnut Street in West Philly, around 43rd, 42nd. They have a summer camp. Well, not this year.
Right.
So, Ellen, I never got any kind of a form to fill out.
You
Gail-
mean an evaluation form?
Yeah, Gail said something about a form, but I couldn't find it.
Yeah, because
Oh,
you'll get it afterwards. I'll put the form, the link for the form in the chat afterwards, and you can use that.
And Jerry, my daughter, jumped on that email. As soon as she saw that I posted that thing about the stamps on the ballot, she immediately
I knew it sounded
about
bogus.
What's happening?
Wow, they're like pouring in here.
Well,
We've got 21.
21, yeah. We only have 5 minutes, so.
Well, for the
It's
last
early.
session, Elaine, everybody came on like in the last 3 or 4 minutes.
Hmm,
So
Okay.
I'm not surprised. Yeah.
That's the way it is, you know, typical. Okay, pretty much everybody's visible and pretty much
early.
everybody's unmuted. And
Mute.
talk
don't
amongst
have to mute,
yourselves
yeah.
for 4 minutes.
Jerry's doing it.
All right, so we have 22 people and we're supposed to have around 60. So I'll let Elaine decide when to literally get the ball rolling. Although people can, you know, if people tune in after Elaine's introduction, they'll still be with us for the main event.
Matthew just got on.
Okay. Well, I hope to get the majority on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Elaine. I mean, for sure, we want to wait till 8
You want us to
anyway.
mute?
Pardon?
We should all
I
mute
said-
now?
No, we don't have to be muted now because let's wait till 8 o'clock.
Elaine, can I tell them our connection?
Oh, do you really want to tell everybody? Yes.
It's so cool.
Now I have everybody listening.
Elaine and I figured out, it didn't take very long, we figured out that she was teaching at Central High School for 1 year, and that 1 year was my senior year there.
Oh, really?
Oh, really?
You didn't have her as a teacher.
Oh, I'd remember. She'd remember.
Well, there were almost no women at the school. No
It was an all boys school at the time. Second oldest public school in the United States.
So Elaine, were you there the year that some of the girls did it?
outside the door.
No, I was there from 66 to 67.
That's
Oh, okay.
great.
Yeah, the girls came in, I think, the
They came later.
80s or 90s, I think.
They had public schools that were
They
meant
came
to
when
be
my
older.
son entered.
When?
Hello.
When Alex entered Central, that was the year I think there were some girls.
What year was that?
That was, he's 246, so what year was that?
I don't, 246 would be 22 years after me, so that would be 89.
Yeah, that sounds pretty good.
Oh, very good for a math teacher.
You said it was
Very
all
good,
boys
Jerry.
till
I still know how to
1989?
add. I still know how to add. It's amazing. A skill that you can't lose.
Did you hear that?
Yeah.
Hi, Benzion and Jane.
Hi, Benzion and Jane.
Hi.
Hi, Ellen, and hi, Elaine.
Hi
Oh,
there.
hi, Alice.
Ian in the background.
Where?
I hear my son is on. I want to find him.
Yeah.
There's my sister. Hi, Bev.
Hello. Hello.
Hi, I'm Bev.
Oh, wow, you have family here.
I
Hi,
just wanted,
Beverly.
I want to introduce myself. Randy Levin from Milwaukee. I'm very good and close friends with Steve Moffic and Evan Moffic, Rabbi Moffic.
Wait, where are you?
Well, welcome.
From Milwaukee. And
Welcome to you.
very close friends and colleague with Dr. Moffic and his son, Rabbi Moffic. So,
What about Rusty?
oh, there, yeah, I didn't. Anyway, and Rusty, 30 plus years.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's beautiful.
Okay.
Well,
now
I'm
we'll-
another Wisconsinite.
Oh, welcome to you.
Thank you.
Wisconsin?
Okay.
So Elaine,
Yes,
you're the moderator?
I am.
Good. Good. Very
Okay.
nice.
So we'll give it one more minute. Oh, we're at 43. That's good. According
Yeah.
to I have all kinds of stopwatches and clocks because this is a tight schedule. So according to my clock, we still have one more minute.
I just saw Steve.
I'm there,
they're just talking and started.
I have 8 o'clock.
You're just pouring in. Look at this. Wow.
Bill,
46.
get to you.
You got 2 full screens worth.
That's all you can do is wait. They
We
gotta
got
let you in.
46.
That's why they have you
assigned.
register. There we go.
Hey, a lot of people on. Didn't see you.
Hi, Jeff.
Hello. How are you?
We're good. Good
Yeah.
to see you.
I've got you all on full screen now and you all look so charming.
Thank you.
Well, according to my clock, it's 8 o'clock.
And we have
So,
47 participants.
Yeah.
I think we can start. They'll start joining us as you speak.
all right. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to our pop-up day of learning session entitled The Longest Running Prejudice. A rabbi and a psychiatrist look at anti-Semitism. Our speakers will be Rabbi Evan Moffic, psychiatrist Dr. H. Stephen Moffic, and ADL board member Jonathan Krause. I'm Elaine Jaskol Crane, the moderator for this session, and our tech angel is Jerry Silverman. Days of learning are dedicated to two goals: Jewish learning, obviously, but also to creating profound connections. This evening is unusual for a few reasons. It's not often that we have a father and son duo as our speakers, and both very distinguished speakers, I might add, but also because we will have the chance, we have already had the chance, to make connections not only with our own RS members, but also with members of two other congregations associated with our speakers. And perhaps give us a wave, visitors from Rabbi Moffic's congregation, Makom Solel Lakeside in Highland Park, Illinois, and Dr. Moffic's congregation Shalom in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So hello to you and a very hearty welcome. Jonathan Krause is one of our own, so RSers, you can give him a wave. And welcome to anyone else who might be joining us. The intent of this session is to get a deeper, more fundamental, more nuanced understanding of the history, the causes, and the impacts of anti-Semitism, and perhaps some solutions. We hope to do that by considering three different perspectives. Obviously, this is a very large and fraught topic that I think I can safely say every Jew has thought about at some length. We're fortunate to have such outstanding speakers, but our time for them and for our questions is limited. So please let me explain how we will schedule. Rabbi Evan Moffic will give a 15-minute presentation, largely based, I'm sure, on his recent book entitled, and I'm going to show it to you. Can you see? Yeah. First, the Jews, combating the world's longest running hate campaign. Following Rabbi's presentation, we'll have 10 minutes for questions directed to the Rabbi only. Please submit your questions for him during his presentation in the chat at the bottom of your screen, so that we're ready to present them as soon as he finishes speaking. We will not be taking raised hands because our session is tight time-wise. So again, all questions should be presented in the chat and can be addressed to either everyone or to Jerry Silverman. Jerry promises me he'll find them no matter whom they're addressed to. And Jerry will curate them and send them to me. Dr. Stephen Moffic, who has just edited and contributed chapters to a book entitled Anti-Semitism and Psychiatry, will then speak for his 15 minutes. Following his presentation, we'll have, again, 10 minutes of questions specifically for him that you should write in the chat during his talk.
Huh?
What is that on the side?
That's me.
Please mute.
On the left side?
Please mute.
You want to see you?
No!
All right, thank you.
Well, I'll mute everybody after we do the blessing.
Okay, a little comedic relief there. All right. Our last speaker will be Jonathan Krause, a board member of the local Anti-Defamation League, who will speak for 10 minutes on a perspective from the ADL. We'll then have 15 minutes remaining, during which time we'll take questions addressed to any or all panelists about any aspect of the broad topic. So please continue to submit questions for the panel as we go along. We will wrap up at 9:25, at which time we'll ask you to fill in an evaluation form. The session will end promptly at 9:30, and those who wish to continue to converse may do so for 15 minutes or so after the session with the assistance of our tech angel, Jerry. A few points. If you are having difficulty with any technical aspect, please write a chat to Jerry Silverman. Please know that the session is recorded, we hope.
Yeah, it's being recorded. Yes, it is.
Great. This is a topic touching all of us in our lives and in our hearts, and we want to be respectful of everyone's feelings. There are no wrong questions. Speakers, because of our time constraints, I'll be giving you a 2-minute heads up gently before the end of your scheduled presentation time. As is our tradition, we'll begin with the prayer for study that Jerry will put on the screen now, I hope. It feels so much better when we say and hear our prayers as a community. So Jerry will unmute you, or
Is it up there?
okay.
Is it up there?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Hey.
And he's also going to point to the words so that we can stay together as we read. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher nitanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. You want to do it in English? Blessed are you, Adonai, God, sovereign of all, who has us with mitzvot, commanding us to engage with words of Torah. Thank you. And now Jerry will mute everyone.
And I'm going to get rid of all the pictures of everybody except our co-hosts and our moderator. Okay.
Elaine, you're muted. The North Shore of Chicago.
Elaine, start over again.
Okay.
You were muted.
Oh, all right. Rabbi Evan Moffic is a graduate of Stanford University and Hebrew Union College. He is the spiritual leader of Makom Solel Lakeside in Highland Park, Illinois, on the North Shore of Chicago. He has been featured in major national print publications, is a frequent religious commentator on Fox News and CNN, and is an active blogger and vlogger. Through his speaking events, he brings new understanding of the Jewish heritage to churches of varied denominations. He is the author of several books, including The Happiness Prayer, Shalom for the Heart, What Every Christian Needs to Know About the Jewishness of Jesus, and most recently, the book we'll focus on this evening, First the Jews, Combating the World's Longest Running Hate Campaign. Rabbi Moffic has another distinction. If you were online, you might have seen that's of interest to us. He is the son-in-law of our very own Ellen and Stan Koster, because he is married to their daughter, another rabbi, Rabbi Ari Moffic. So Rabbi Moffic, I wonder if you would begin by briefly telling us what brought you to write this book at this time.
Absolutely. And let me just also thank you for this kind introduction and invitation. And I have visited Rodef Shalom with my wonderful in-laws, and what a beautiful congregation you have. and great clergy, Rabbi Mader, Rabbi Friedman, just really, what a terrific congregation, really awe-inspiring to walk in. So I am just really delighted to be here. So I wrote this book. I actually started thinking about this book in 2015 because we started to see a resurgence of anti-Semitism then. And if you think back, just 20 years ago, think back when Joe Lieberman was nominated to be vice president, or he was the vice presidential nominee for the Democratic Party. And we saw virtually no anti-Semitism. You think back, there was very little pushback. Here's an Orthodox Jewish person nominated to be vice president. Fast forward to today, and anti-Semitism, incidents of anti-Semitism have skyrocketed. In fact, the ADL, which I'm so happy we have someone on their board who's here, the ADL did a study, they do studies every year, and in 1997, I believe, was the lowest number of anti-Semitic incidents on record. So the late 1990s was really a wonderful time to be Jewish, really just almost a golden age. And really starting in the year 2000, and there's a lot of, I mean, we can't go into all the history, but we started to see an uptick in anti-Semitism. Really after 9/11, it started increasing more, but even starting in 2000 at the United Nations. And really today, we're kind of seeing two primary kinds of anti-Semitism. In the book, I do a long history of where we got to where we are, starting with, the church and how Judaism was really an early branch of Christianity, or Christianity was an early branch of Judaism, and the split created greater tensions. You have banking, you have the a rise of Hitler and racism and all that. But really, the anti-Semitism we're seeing today is a kind of mutation. And it comes from both the left and the right, the extreme parts of the left and the right. And that's the unique feature. And so I'll start with sort of anti-Semitism from the left. And really, for our presentation, I wanted to focus on really anti-Semitism over the last 20 years. You can read the history, you can ask me questions about the history, but I think what all of us are really interested in is right now. So starting in the early 2000s, you had the slow rise of the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement. And this is the belief that Israel is the world's worst human rights abuser. And Israel is guilty of committing genocide. And any person who is identified with Israel or who does not speak out against Israel is essentially implicit in genocide and oppression. And this became a kind of talking point on the far left. In fact, the first person to really call it out publicly was the president of Harvard University at the time, Larry Summers. In 2002, he gave a speech at the Harvard Memorial Church where he got up and said, anti-Semitism used to be the provenance of, not the mainstream, of very out of the mainstream kind of fringe people like a David Duke or, these sort of fringy organizations, which exist and they have influence, but they're not publicly acceptable. He said, now we are seeing it deep into the academy with people who refuse to visit Israel, refuse to sit on panels with Israeli professors. And he said, this is a higher form of anti-Semitism. And he said, you can be anti-Semitic in effect, if not in intent. So somebody who think that they are a great champion of human rights, but they are by focusing solely on Israel, they are essentially participating in anti-Semitism. And this movement, which really started on sort of elite university campuses, has really grown. I mean, I don't want to get political here, but you do see it in the fringes of kind of the far left of liberal politics. Someone like an Ilhan Omar talking about, it's all about the Benjamins and AIPAC rules the world. I mean, that Pat Buchanan said in the 1980s, Congress is Israeli occupied territory. And you see that same kind of feeling on the very far left today. And so that is a growing form of anti-Semitism. And just to touch on this briefly, because this is a question I get asked all the time, how do you distinguish between legitimate criticisms of Israel and anti-Semitism? So where does it cross the line? And that's a very tricky question. But there is something called the 3Ds test. And this is a very good, it was really invented by Natan Sharansky, who said, if you delegitimize, if you say Israel has no right to exist, there shouldn't be a Jewish state, that's anti-Semitism. That's the first D, delegitimize. Then there is double standards. If all you talk about is oppression in Israel, and you don't talk about China or Saudi Arabia or any other place where there's human rights, where there are abuses, if all you talk about is how bad Israel is, that's double standards. That crosses the line into anti-Semitism. And the third D is demonization. If you say things totally, just absolutely crazy about Israel, like there's an academic at Duke University who wrote a book where she argued that Israel deliberately maims and injures Palestinians just to send a message in which there's no evidence, or that Israel poisons Palestinian wells and tries to kill Palestinian children. If you are making arguments like that are just so far outside of the realm of possibility, then that's demonization, and that's a form of anti-Semitism. You can say Israel is overly aggressive. You can make arguments like that, but if you veer too far to that demonization, that's a form of anti-Semitism. So you have the 3 Ds. And so now, then, really starting in 2015, we had this new kind of anti-Semitism from the right, or really the alt-right, because it's not just conservative politicians. Interestingly, the #1 target of online anti-Semitism in 2016 was a very, very conservative political writer named Ben Shapiro. I don't know if any of you have heard of him. He's, right of right. He's, but he was the #1 target of the alt-right. So it's not purely political. It's alt-right is a kind of term that describes a kind of nativist, white supremacist approach. And this really emerged strongly in 2015. And it was guided by a couple of sort of key ideas. One is nationalism, that America is a country of white Europeans, and anyone who is different from that is really outside of the norm. And Jews are often associated with cosmopolitanism, with globalism. Sometimes the word globalism is a code word for Jews. So this alt-right anti-Semitism, the strong nationalism, saw Jews as outsiders. That's the idea when in Charlottesville, when people were marching with the signs that said Jews will not replace us. That was the idea behind those signs, that Jews represent globalist, cosmopolitan, replacing the pure native, not Native American as in Indians, Native American as in, European white Americans, and that Jews represent the antithesis of that. And this is, by the way, this is not new. I mean, the alt-right as a phenomenon was new, but this idea of Jews as the prototypical outsiders is a long-standing idea. It goes back to the 1930s. That was the peak of anti-Semitism in America was the 1930s, by the way, if you go back and look historically. But the idea, whenever there is antipathy towards immigrants, towards outsiders, that's almost a clue that there's an increase in anti-Semitism. So that kind of anti-immigration sentiment you saw on the far right, that coincided with the rise in anti-Semitism. You also had, and this is somewhat connected, but a little bit different, the kind of anger at globalism, at Wall Street, at international finance, and kind of the same kind of sort of protectionism and tariffs. I'm not making an economic argument here, but the idea of kind of decoupling America from the world, that is often associated with kind of a rise in anti-Semitism also, because Jews tend to be associated, again, with kind of banking, with globalism, with Hollywood, the sort of demonization of Hollywood. In fact, I was surprised actually that some of the Weinstein and Epstein controversies, didn't actually increase anti-Semitism. It really didn't. There was already, obviously, I think some people may not know that, these are typically Jewish names, but, you really didn't see an impact from that. But those two kind of things, high finance and Hollywood, are often used in far-right anti-Semitic caricatures. So when there's that kind of antipathy from the far right, that leads to a rise in anti-Semitism. Again, though both those phenomenons, anti-Semitism from the far left and anti-Semitism from the far right, have both grown. And here's sort of my own personal view. This is not certainly fact, but in the short term, I think anti-Semitism from the far right is the greater danger. So if God forbid you turned on the news tomorrow morning and heard about a violent anti-Semitic incident like what happened in Pittsburgh or what happened in San Diego, you would probably assume it came from someone on the far right. That is who is committing anti-Semitic violence. The guy in Pittsburgh hated Jews because of HIAS, because of the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. He hated immigrants. And so he saw Jews as identifying with immigrants. Same with the person in San Diego. So violent anti-Semitism from the far right is a greater short-term danger. However, I believe the greater long-term danger is a kind of anti-Semitism from the far left, because ideas seep down into society. And when you have Israel demonized and seen as a human rights abuser and as a typical of a human rights abuser, and that becomes a mainstream view, that has long-term, and you're seeing that with the way younger people, in fact, support for kind of a support for Israel, actually among Jews, it's a downward slope with age. You see people 60 and over feel a stronger connection, and it goes down with age. So I actually think that is a longer term danger. Now that there's a lot of other ramifications, that's not just anti-Semitism, that there's a lot of politics involved in that too. But I think that is a greater long-term threat to Jewish identity. And so that's where we are. And anti-Semitic incidents just keep increasing. I mean, you see it in New York. We saw the worst incident in 2018 in Pittsburgh, and then in 2019 in San Diego. But I want to end my remarks just on a little bit note of hope. Right now, of course, we're not entering the building, but outside of the High Holy Days, probably the biggest worship service, the greatest attendance that I ever had was on the Friday night after the shootings in Pittsburgh. And it was not just because people in my own congregation came, which they did, but people from all over the community, including priests and ministers and members of churches. They all came that Friday night to show support. And that is a hopeful sign that Jews, we can't solve anti-Semitism. We can say, it's like a patient can't heal himself or herself. You need others. And so in a way, anti-Semitism, it affects us, but it's really a problem for other peoples. And when I saw that there was this great feeling of support and solidarity, that is a hopeful sign that we are taking this seriously and doing something about it. So thank you again. I'm happy to take questions about history, about where we are now, about anti-Semitic incidents, or anything else you're interested in.
Start with this question. There are some very knowledgeable writers and organizations who feel that the term anti-Semitism is not as precise or accurate for describing the true problem as the term Jew hatred, which is appearing more frequently. And I'd like to know what your thoughts are about that replacement.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. I mean, anti-Semitism is a relatively modern term. It was invented in 1871 by a German guy who was created the League of Anti-Semites in Germany. And obviously Arabs are Semites or Palestinians are Semites. So it definitely is an imprecise term. Jew hatred is a better term. I deliberately did not include anti-Semitism in the title of this book. Maybe I should have, I don't know. But because sometimes, people are not certain it is about anti-Semitism. But I think Jew hatred is definitely a more accurate term. The problem is there is really no good definition of anti-Semitism. I mean, how do you really define it? Because it's not just, it's not just criticism of Jews. Anti-Semitism is philosophical, it is psychological, it is racial, it is religious, it is all of these things. It's the closest anti-Semitism is like a virus too. It mutates. That's one of the arguments I make in the book. is that anti-Semitism, you think you've quashed it. Like, people thought during the Enlightenment, in the age of reason, that these old religious prejudices would fall away. You read some of the writings from the early Reform rabbis, and they really thought, anti-Semitism was on the decline. This age of reason would cure people of their prejudices. But anti-Semitism mutates, it takes on different forms. So there's really no good definition of it.
People often say that Hitler couldn't have brought about the Holocaust if Christianity hadn't laid the groundwork for centuries. What are your thoughts on that matter?
Yeah, it's a very good argument. There was a very well-known book written, I think it came out in 2001, called Hitler's Willing Executioners by Daniel Jonah Goldhagen at Harvard. And what he talked about is essentially anti-Semitism was imbibed with mother's milk in Germany, and that really all Hitler had to do was essentially flip on a light switch to unleash this hatred of Jews. I think there is some truth to that. Anti-Semitism was absolutely a part of Christianity, taught from the very beginning. The hardest chapter I wrote in the book was about the Middle Ages. That was really the height of Christian anti-Semitism. You see it in art, you see it in writings, the blood libel charge, there's so much. So for sure. However, one of the interesting things is, one of the great achievements of the 20th century is that the reconciliation between Jews and Christians. After the Holocaust, there has really been an amazing sense of understanding and dialogue. It's really starting with Vatican II and a recognition and acceptance of Jews, going through the state of Israel and Christian visits to Israel. Now that's got its own set of issues, which we can talk about. That would be another interesting topic. Talk about evangelical relationships with Israel. That's a very interesting topic. But in general, relationships between Jews and Christians have never been better in history. Now, relationships between Jews and Muslims have almost never been worse. So that's, but from a Jewish Christian perspective, we're in a very good time right now.
Mm-hmm. What about the courts allowing free speech when it comes to protests against the synagogue, but allowing universities to cancel pro-Israel talks or rallies?
Well, that's an interesting question. I don't know too much about that. I personally am a big free speech advocate, so I think it's fine to protest wherever. I think it's actually a big problem on college campuses. We had here at my synagogue, we had one of my professors from Stanford. His name is Steven Zipperstein, and he taught a wonderful class on Zionism and its critics, a class on Zionism's critics that I took when I was there. And he is as pretty far left, as far left as you can go on the Jewish spectrum. And he told me that he can't teach his class anymore because simply the mention of the word Zionism generates huge protests to his class. And it was a great class. So I think that there really is a problem with people hearing arguments from different sides. So I would advocate that we're open to hearing all different points of view.
All right, thank you. Yeah. We have some questions that are a little bit political, but I will read them. Have anti-Semitic acts outpaced acts against other minorities during Trump's era of opinion making, either in percentage increase or numbers?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I think I'll deflect over to Jonathan from the ADL to answer that more completely. But I do think from the statistics that I have read, anti-Semitic incidents are still the top hate crime. And the reason is, this is not reported as much, but in New York, Orthodox Jews are targeted violently all the time. There are almost daily incidents of violence against Orthodox Jews. Who are visibly. So this is something that is really a danger now. I don't see it. I'm in Highland Park, Illinois, but I do. I was talking with some of our kids from Highland Park High School who were on a hockey team playing a hockey game against another suburb that's sort of further west and really doesn't have many Jews in it. Chicago is very much neighborhood centric. And there was anti-Semitism between the parents and between the players. throwing bagels onto the glass. I mean, bad stuff. So I do think it's there. I don't know though how it compares with others.
Mhm. The new book, Cast by Wilkerson, compares anti-Semitism during Nazi Germany to the untouchables in India and treatment of Blacks in America. Any thoughts on that?
No, I mean, I haven't read the book. I've certainly heard about it. And she wrote another book called The Warmth of Other Suns, which I read many years ago. I think there's probably some truth to that. I mean, there is a big debate among scholars, and I get into this in the book, as to where Jews fit in. Are Jews white? Well, in many ways, yes, but Jews are often associated with minorities. So, where do we fit in on the intersectional spectrum is a big question. Jews tend to be more affluent than others. I mean, so where we fit in on that intersectional spectrum is a huge question. So I think in general, some of, if anyone follows Barry Weiss, she's talked a lot about this. I think it depends on the organization, it depends on the time. So it's a very hard question to answer.
Mm-hmm. In your book, you say that education and reason are not the solution to prejudice. That might come as a surprise to many of us. Can you explain that idea?
No, I mean, I think education and enlightenment are good. Of course, we should all, but think about it. Germany was perhaps the most educated country in all of Europe. Beethoven, one of the great anti-Semites was the greatest philosopher, Heidegger. Martin Heidegger is considered the greatest philosopher of the 20th century, and he was a full-fledged Nazi. And he's actually worse than people thought. People saw his diaries after the war. I mean, he really hated Jews. And so I think that, there's a lot of, I love neuroscience. I love following what's happening. Most people, we used to think that we're pretty rational beings, but most of us we actually are more emotionally driven, and then we rationalize our decisions. It's like we see a car and then we really like it. And then we're like, well, I'm getting a discount on it. It's got good gas mileage, but we've already made it up in our heads that this is what we're going to get. And that's not everybody. Some people are more reasonable than others. We all know that. But in general, I think our emotions and biases play a bigger part, perhaps unconsciously. I think my dad could probably talk about that better than I can. But some of these prejudices are so deep that it's very hard to solve with reason.
You have, before we turn to Dr. Moffic, there are about 2 more minutes. Is there anything you'd like to talk about that perhaps you haven't addressed yet? And I'll just encourage everyone to continue to put questions in the chat.
I think that the important thing to keep in mind, well, 2 things. I think that anti-Semitism is a virus and it mutates. And there's really not, people, every time I give talks on it, and I've talked at lots of different churches, ranging from evangelical to Universalist Unitarian, and people always say, why the Jews? Jews have been, many people recognize that Jews have won lots of Nobel Prizes, that, people have Jewish neighbors who are really kind and giving and so forth. Jews are very charitable. You see that. So why is there anti-Semitism? My answer is, we just don't know. There is something deeply perhaps rooted in humanity. And the one reason that I think one way to think about it is Jews have always represented the outsider. Jonathan Sachs, the former chief rabbi of Great Britain, said that Jews represent the dignity of difference. That Jews, in the era of the Roman Empire, Jews were different. In the era of Christianity, when medieval Europe was under Christian dominion, Jews were different. In a global world, increasingly global world, Israel is a nationalist country. And so there is something, and even in an overwhelmingly Christian country like the United States, Jews are outsiders. Now, the United States is unique because we're a nation of outsiders, but we have always been different. And people, in humanity, we don't like people that are different from us, or, we're tribal in many ways. Hopefully we overcome that. But that is, I think, one way to think about it, is that Jews represent the dignity of difference.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Now we're going to turn to Dr. Moffic, Dr. Oops, sorry, I have to turn off my timer. Dr. H. Stephen Moffic is an award-winning psychiatrist, including receiving the one-time designation of being a hero of public psychiatry by the American Psychiatric Association. He attended University of Michigan undergrad, Yale Medical School, and University of Chicago for the study of psychiatry. Guided by Tikkun Olam, the repair of the world, and Tikkun Atzmi, the healing of one's self, he concentrated on underserved people and patients in psychiatry. After retiring from practice, he has focused on writing, editing, and presenting to the public and other professionals, most recently on Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, among other critical topics. He does various projects with his son, Rabbi Evan, including a recent series together about the Jonah and the whale story. So Dr. Moffic, a warm welcome to you out in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Jerry has put up the screen share of the 10 points that you wanted to distill from your book for us. But before you begin speaking about them, could you please tell us what brought you to your recent book, Anti-Semitism and Psychiatry, Recognition, Prevention, and Interventions? And also, did you and your son make a plan to embark on the topic at the same time with your respective books, or was that just coincidental?
Thank you. Yes, actually, we've been talking about anti-Semitism for years, but of course he beat me to the punch. And as you could already see, he's hard to follow. But you also might imagine this is really a terrific experience for me to do anything professionally that also has personal meaning like this. Now, sometimes I like to dedicate something I'm doing to someone. It's rare, but I'd like to do it this time around because there's somebody that was really important to both the rabbi and myself who died a month ago, which is Rabbi Sam Karf, who was one of the giants of Reform Judaism. And as we were thinking about doing that, I wanted to find out what he said about anti-Semitism. And I couldn't locate it, but maybe the rabbi can. But he had a phrase that he used about this issue, which is called boldly experimental, that Reform Jews should be boldly experimental. And I think that's what we need to do now. One of the reasons I got into this is no matter how good we're doing organizationally in dealing with anti-Semitism, it's clearly not enough. So we have to think of new strategies, I think, which is not going to be easy. So how did I get into this book? I think in a way, I'm going to criticize myself. I don't know if this is going to make sense until later on. But first, I was asked by the editor at Springer International if I wanted to edit a book on Islamophobia and psychiatry. Now that seemed really weird to me. How could I, as a Jew, edit a book on Islamophobia? You know, I get smeared all over the place. There's enough extreme Muslims against Jews. So how could I be the editor? But they couldn't find anybody else, nor could I. So I thought, okay, I'll do it if I can find a couple of Muslim psychiatrists. And I did one in England and one in the United States, a woman and a Christian psychiatrist. And we did this, and I thought this could be a model for dealing with problems like Islamophobia, kind of a multi-faith, multicultural endeavor. So the book was finished maybe 2 years ago. It's done really well, a bestseller as far as Springer is concerned. It's very expensive, but if you're interested, you can get individual chapters from it. So we finished this book, and the editor asked me, what do you want to do now? I said, well, I got this idea. All kinds of mental problems, mental disorders are escalating in the United States year by year. let's do a book on that. And she said, okay, that's a good idea, but I live in New York. Anti-Semitism is escalating here. Why don't you do the same sort of book on anti-Semitism? And I said to myself, why didn't I think of this? Why did I put this not only second, but I didn't even think about doing it? And I think that's our tendency, tikkun olam tendency, to think about helping others before we help ourselves. And I think anti-Semitism actually should be number one on our list. If you're not for yourself, who will be? Per Hillel, right? So I think that should be our first priority. So that's sort of how I got into doing the anti-Semitism book. And out of that book came sort of the 10 principles that were up on the screen. And it doesn't matter whether you put them back up or not, because I could just list them myself. So the first one actually had to do with what is anti-Semitism. We kind of grappled with that, the psychiatrists and psychologists who wrote this book. And, you know, it sounds like, okay, it's a hatred, but what does that even mean? And sometimes hate is good anyways. Our basic conclusion is that it's a social disease. And anybody who knows West Side Story probably remembers the song Officer Krupke. So here's just a few lines from that talks about a social disease. Society's played him a terrible trick, and sociologically he's sick. There is good, there is good, there is untapped good. And it's really a deep kind of phrase saying that there are social issues that cause problems like anti-Semitism. You know, it was supposed to be about Jews as one of the gangs first, and then it was changed. So, but it also says something can be done to help these people. So we decided it was a social disease. The only trouble about that is there's no category of social diseases, even though there's a lot of social problems like anti-Semitism out there. Islamophobia, racism, sexism, burnout, et cetera, but there is no classification for it. I think there should be. Two, social metaphor. You know, we have this metaphor in the United States that we're a melting pot. I think that's problematic. It essentially is saying all our cultures should just merge into one United States culture, whatever that is. But if we really mean that, it means that all Jews should assimilate and our own culture is less important. So we came up with another metaphor, which is a potluck dinner, where all cultures should bring their best selves. In this case, in terms of food, what everybody likes. But a potluck kind of dinner should be more of the metaphor in our country. I think that would serve ourselves better. Three, interfaith relationships. You know, we're doing better, as Rabbi said, with Christians for sure. Slow improvement maybe with Muslims. But the group that we found, to my surprise, that maybe has never had any significant anti-Semitism is Hindus. And we had a chapter on that, which almost went beyond some of our belief, that the claim was made that Hindus have never been anti-Semitic. But it looks like that's really true. And it's not because the numbers were so small in India. They were pretty significant at a point of time with no anti-Semitism apparently there. And there are countries that there were never Jews where there was anti-Semitism. But I think it's how that religion formed, separate from Judaism. In another country, there wasn't competition, and it's actually pretty open in its beliefs. So I think it behooves us to make stronger ties to Indians in the United States. Their population is probably about the same as Jews in the United States. They're very successful. They're in high tech. I think that's a match made in heaven that we've kind of ignored. Holocaust education. You know, the rabbi mentioned some about the pros and cons of education. And in Wisconsin, we just passed a state law for Holocaust education, which you think would be good. And hopefully it can be, but it depends on how good it is. But I think the real essence of education needs to be with parents. Now, maybe we can get to parents through the schools, but they're the key, I think, to reducing anti-Semitism in their children. There was a psychologist did a study of the Holocaust about the righteous Gentiles. And the one variable that stood out among the righteous variables were that the parents taught tolerance. That was number one. So we know that can be helpful for anti-Semitism if parents will do that. Social justice. I sort of already mentioned this. You know, we're great with tikkun olam. We're concerned about other minorities and so forth. But I think here, especially nowadays, we have to put ourselves first, or at least on an equal basis as those we're concerned about outside of ourselves. Helping other cultures. I think this is kind of interesting. It takes over from the last point in the sense that we do a lot to help other cultures. We certainly did that with Blacks in the 60s and 70s, and we've kind of split off. There's been some more conflict with them. There is a psychology that's sort of counterintuitive here. When you're helped, a group of people or individuals, sometimes you even end up resenting the help. You know, it makes you feel dependent, ashamed, and you don't want to have anything to do anymore with that person. Sometimes that even happens in psychiatry. I'll treat a patient, they've done well, and they want to get as far away from me as they possibly can. So I think it's a tricky business to help other people. Sometimes it ends up backfiring in the long run, even though it's the moral and ethical thing to do. One of the ways to kind of counter that is to always praise the people you're helping. You praise them in other things they're doing that they've done well. Personal relationships. We probably all know that's important. Some extremists on the alt-right have given up their extremism when they've met and been comforted by people like Jews and other people who they form a relationship with and helps them. And that's something important for us to do whenever we can. It doesn't work to confront people and say they're wrong. That only intensifies their beliefs. So you have to find a way to kind of get around that where you're not causing cognitive dissonance for themselves so that they just attach more to their beliefs. Anger management intervention. Okay, now we're going to get into some wild stuff. So there's a technique you probably heard of called anger management, and it works. Often it's court-ordered for couples that are having trouble. Sometimes it's usually done by men, but not only who are the kind of abusers. But it seems to work if people will take part in it. We posited the idea that you could do anti-Semitic management in the same way, using the same principles. The trick, of course, is getting anti-Semitism people to come for treatment because they think there's nothing wrong with their ideas. So the challenge will be not how to help them, I think we could do that, but how to get them into treatment, whether that could become court-ordered or some other mechanism to get them into treatment. What about psychiatric medications, right? Medications nowadays are very popular. So there's a rabbi a while ago who died, if I get the name wrong, my son will correct me, Shachter Salome, who before he died in a book called The December Years, he talked about, and he used this himself, that you could use LSD to help people feel more connected to one another. It can bring out kind of cosmic feelings. And that, in a way, sounds a little crazy, perhaps. But interestingly enough, nowadays, two things are happening with the psychedelics. One is that micro doses of LSD are being used in the underground a lot. Maybe not in Milwaukee so much, we're pretty conservative, but around the country, micro doses of LSDs are used to kind of dissipate anxiety and anger. And they seem to work. Full dose LSD is also being researched for the first time. So will there ever come a time when substances like LSD become more available? It can help develop these more cosmic feelings. Some old medications also can help, again, if you can get people in for treatment. One of them is Prozac and its related medications. They can kind of cut down anger. And then there's one called propranolol, which is used, it's a heart medicine, very common. It can be used in psychiatry to reduce anxiety for people who are anxious about speaking and so forth. But it's a really good medicine to give people after trauma. But it's been found in just a couple studies that it may be helpful to reduce anti-Semitic and also racial feelings. Number 9, making the most of being in the middle. You know, in a lot of societies, certainly in the United States, we could be said to be in the middle. Sometimes that's good and sometimes it's not. It's good if the people on top try to make bonds with us and think we're valuable, but we can just as well be discriminated against if discrimination against the lower level doesn't work. It's kind of a precarious position. It's just like the middle child in the family. Can be a peacekeeper, but sometimes is kind of rejected with that role. And then human nature. Why have we had this so long? Rabbi Moffic talked about this a little bit, and I think he's right. We basically, as a human species, are scared, frightened of people who are different. And that goes back a long way. And it occurs now when it doesn't have to, but you see it in kids growing up, whether that's the first evidence of stranger anxiety around 1 year of age, but then again at 4 or 5 years old, a white child, when they first encounter black kids, can easily get frightened. So that's kind of inborn in us, and that may be a factor. Number two is we have a tendency to scapegoat other people for our own deficiencies. So if we Jews do so well, it may make other people feel envious of us and scapegoat us. And I think one of the keys that makes us unique is not only this idea of being different all the time, but our emphasis on ethics, ethical monotheism. People don't like to be told they need to be better ethically or morally. And I think sometimes that comes across from us, and we're proud of our ethics, but it may not make other people feel so good. It may make them feel jealous and that we're holier than thou. So we have to be careful about that, I think. And in a way, that's one of the ways we're thought of as being the chosen people. So being chosen has its pluses and minuses for sure. So I think I got through the basics of all these 10 points. So let me pause and see if there's questions.
Great, thank you so much. All right, so we have a comment here that, let's see. Well, let me just go to the question. To the extent, this sort of corresponds to your discussion of anger management and using some of what you have found there. To the extent that younger Americans have learned or grown up to be more tolerant of LGBTQ and than older generations, is there a hint that there for how to normalize acceptance of Jews in the broader society?
Yeah, I think that's a really nice development. You know, it's also true probably with racial differences that younger people seem more tolerant. So that's a plus for the future. I don't know how much that's coming across as far as Jews are concerned, though. You know, again, Rabbi Moffic may have some ideas about this myself, but I'm not sure that tolerance is spreading so much to Jews. And then there's the issue of how much Jews are assimilating now, and the potential problem of that in a certain kind of way. I think one of the keys with that kind of issue, though, are so-called Jews of color. And I say so-called because I think we're all people of color. But I think they're kind of the potential bridging people that can help this tolerance spread toward Jews. If we Jews that don't have darker skin color are welcoming and make partnership with Jews of so-called color again, and they're a link to minorities and other groups that are oppressed. So I think they're a key constituency for us.
Okay, here's a little comment. Ironic that a heart medicine could reduce hatred. Just a comment. What about the use of CBD, which is being more frequently used for issues with anxiety and other ailments? Is that stranger anxiety less in those who grow up in a more ethnically diverse and multicultural environment?
Well, yeah, and you know, there's a difference between CBD and regular marijuana, you know, that's legal in certain states, and the potency of regular marijuana is certainly much greater. I think there is some hope there. One of the problems is that neither regular marijuana nor CBD has been researched very much. So we don't really know much about them. We're in a period of kind of experimentation about it. I think for the most part, one of the things marijuana does is reduce social anxiety. Does that help reduce anti-Semitism? Maybe it does, or maybe it would if it's used at the right dose for the right amount of time. On the other hand, it tends to make you passive. So if you're looking for marijuana to help people get engaged and address these issues, then it's not maybe the drug of choice. But I could see where potentially it could be helpful with anti-Semitism because of those kind of relaxation properties that it has.
Thank you. What kind of reaction has this list of prospective psychiatric remedies for anti-Semitism received in the wider professional community?
Yeah, that's an interesting topic, because one of the reasons it's interesting is because we don't talk about it. We don't talk about anti-Semitism and psychiatry very much. That's one of the reasons I wanted to edit the book. Even though psychiatry is essentially a Jewish-based profession in its origins and development, there's no organization of Jewish psychiatrists, really, at least if you're not Orthodox. There's Black Psychiatrist Associations, Hispanic Psychiatrist Associations, and so forth. Psychiatry is concerned with those groups, the minority groups. It's the same as my point before, that we tend not to toot our own horn in our own needs. So it's an issue that's neglected by mainstream psychiatry. And one of the reasons I did the book, I think it's hard now to get psychiatrists interested in this when, for instance, racism is such a hot topic now. It's like, if we as a profession don't deal with racism, we're going to get plastered by people. So that's our focus. And there is, as Rabbi Moffic said, there's definitely some anti-Semitism on the extreme left, and that includes psychiatrists on the extreme left. So it's a really tricky issue to get more attention to that. So it's not like, oh, you're crazy for saying these things. It's like, who cares?
Is there a difference between implied bias and anti-Semitism?
Well, people may have heard that there's these implicit bias tests that are around, and those tests can be more or less taken for any bias. They're questionable in their validity, but they can give you a hint of whether you have a certain amount of bias. The figures that are tossed around is that, say for racism, 90% of people have some degree of underlying racism, and this is unconscious. Rabbi Moffic talked about what's below the surface, and this stuff is unconscious. And then there's explicit racism and explicit anti-Semitism. There's much more buried anti-Semitism, unconscious, that is emerging now. I mean, anti-Semitism was always there. The Rabbi mentioned that it's mutated, the virus is mutated, but just like we have viruses in our body that are not harmful, at times anti-Semitism has just been there, but not leaked out. So implicit bias, you're talking more about unconscious feelings that are controllable, even if you have them. You maybe want to soften them and know about them. But the more explicit anti-Semitism, I think, is more what we have to deal with now. So there's definitely implicit biases for anti-Semitism too. There's implicit bias for ageism, sexism, and so on also.
What, if anything, can psychiatry add to the challenge of addressing anti-Semitism?
Well, I think the biggest potential help, this is potential underlying, I think is defining it as a social disease or social problem, because if you do that, you'll get the attention of physicians, you'll get the attention of psychiatrists. I think you'll get new ideas and new research. So maybe some of the ideas I threw out could be potentially helpful, but I can't underline more that we have to think and find some new ways to address this. And I think psychiatrists can do that. You know, I didn't mention this, but we've ignored the topic of anti-Semitism for 40 years. It was like, okay, the Holocaust is over, people are recovering, anti-Semitism's going away. We lost interest in that. So I don't know really what we can contribute, but I bet we can if it becomes a focus of research and analysis.
Right. Great. Thank you so much. And now we are going to turn to Jonathan Krause and introduce him. Dr. Moffic, thank you so much, and we'll be back with more questions later. Jonathan Krause is a graduate of Duke University School of Law. He is a partner in labor and employment law and litigation at Clare, Harrison, Harvey, Brandsburg. He is a board member of the Anti-Defamation League and a member of the Board of Congregation Road of Shalom. Jonathan, can you please give us a perspective from the ADL, and perhaps in the course of your remarks, you might address some questions that arose that were given to the rabbi and Dr. Moffic.
Sure, I can certainly try, and I just want to say it's my pleasure to be here. I really enjoy hearing the family Moffic on anti-Semitism, the history, and the psychiatry, and I'm very appreciative to have the opportunity to speak and to share in this experience for a couple of hours. And so let me just share with you, there's certainly a lot of ground to cover, a lot has been covered. From the Anti-Defamation League's perspective, let me give you some statistics and then some points of emphasis of where we're seeing different types of anti-Semitism, as in where it's manifesting and what type of form that's taking, and then also what we're feeling in terms of the format in which we're seeing anti-Semitism, and maybe that'll make a little more sense after I give a little bit of my presentation. So the Anti-Defamation League conducts an annual audit, and just to give you some perspective about anti-Semitism and where we are, in 2019, there were what would be characterized as 2,107 anti-Semitic incidents. And the methodology is a little more complicated than what I'll describe in the time provided, but it's essentially incidents in which there was an action taken where a motivating or a core factor for it being taken was because of the Jewishness or the assumed Jewishness of the victim. And that represents a 12% increase from 2018. As Rabbi Moffic spoke to in his presentation, we have seen a continued and persistent increase in the number of anti-Semitic incidents, certainly over the last 5 years, and very much just looking at the multi-decade view, an increase over what I think he rightly characterized as almost the golden age of Judaism in the United States, this interregnum after the Cold War, but before 9/11, which is where I came of age as a Jew. So it's very, as someone who grew up not really feeling anti-Semitism, speaking to where we are now, there's definitely been an increase. So turning back to the 2019 incidents, of the 2,107, 1,127 are characterized as harassment, so verbal, non-physical. 919 are characterized as vandalism, so they're physical, but they're physical as of property, not of individual and a person. And 61 are assaults, and those 61 assaults involve 95 victims and 5 fatalities. So this is, I see the question, this is overall in the United States scale. And in the Pennsylvania area in 2019, rather in Pennsylvania, the Commonwealth, there were 109 incidents in 2019, which was an increase from 89 in 2018. And perhaps most notably of the nonviolent in the local was the vandalism that took place at the Holocaust Memorial, which is just a few blocks away from Congregation Road of Shalom in the prehistoric, pre-COVID era. We may have forgotten, but it wasn't that long ago that right in the center of downtown Philadelphia, the Holocaust Memorial had a swastika, spray painted on it. So where are we seeing the anti-Semitism coming from? What are the sources? And I'll break this down into a little more than the traditional right-left category. So I would say the first and the most dangerous is the right wing, whether you want to call it the alt-right. These are the people who are marching in Charlottesville. These are white supremacists, however they may characterize themselves. They traditionally come from the right wing of the spectrum. And what we have seen with them is white supremacists are where you're most likely to see physical acts of violence and fatalities when it comes to anti-Semitism or other acts of hate. They're not the most subtle of the anti-Semites. They quite literally often wear their hatred on their sleeve, or they use symbols online or in their literature that makes it pretty clear that they are anti-Semitic. Without going too political, obviously, there has been a correlation with some of the rhetoric that's been coming out of the administration in White House and the increases that we see there. The second bucket that I think Rabbi spoke to very eloquently is left-wing anti-Semitism, and you could intersperse with that left-wing academic anti-Semitism. And you're more likely to see this on the university campus. You're more likely to see it mixed in BDS, or with a term called intersectionalism, which is where views tied towards Israel are kind of part of a buffet of progressive issues that good leftists are supposed to embrace. And there's definitely I want to be clear, room for criticism, a legitimate criticism of Israel, but oftentimes with some of this left-wing anti-Semitism, you see either the 3Ds, as was articulated by Rabbi, or you see people who are using Israel as an excuse for anti-Semitism. And what I often use as the explanation for that is, if you're claimed to be protesting Israel by attacking or protesting a synagogue, you're not challenging Israeli policies. You're anti-Semitic, because it's the synagogue is not Israel. And so that, from our perspective, is dangerous because it's invasive, and it has more of I think the veneer of respectability in some of the allies and in some of the fellow travelers than you see from the right wing. It tends to be less violent, although increasingly with anarchists or other elements of that, there is an element of violence, but it's more invasive and potentially setting deeper roots. The third bucket of where you see anti-Semitism, it's almost old-fashioned at this point to be kind of glib about it, and that's Islamist anti-Semitism. It's the type of anti-Semitism that is prevalent in radical elements of the Islamist community. You saw a tremendous rise in it and increase in intention after 9/11. It's your Al-Qaeda's, it's your ISIS's, and other organizations, and also the radical elements that, from a distortion of the Muslim faith, demonize Jews and stereotype Jews. And oftentimes, it results in incidences against them. It's been around. We have not seen an increase of it in the past couple of years, but it certainly hasn't gone away, just because other forms of anti-Semitism have taken greater attention in the form of the alt-right and some of the things that are going on the left. And then the last bucket that I want to identify and maybe distinguish from what we've discussed so far is Black nationalist anti-Semitism. And that's Louis Farrakhan, and that's Nation of Islam. Prominently, recently, locally, it's Rodney Muhammad, who was, up until a couple weeks ago, the head of the local chapter of the NAACP, who brought national attention and infamy to himself and the region with his defense of an anti-Semitic cartoon. This is really, you could see it most prominently in Louis Farrakhan's anti-Semitic teachings. It is a lot of literature. It also does have a violent element in it. It was, not too long ago, if you remember, in Jersey City, there were some shootings that were targeted against the Orthodox community, unfortunately with fatalities, and it was driven by a Black nationalist organization. The exact name escapes me. So those are the different types of buckets. There's certainly other groups. They're not all necessarily mutually exclusive, but I think when you're taking the perspective of who are the anti-Semites, that is a fair summary of what you're looking at. And so then what are we, where are we seeing anti-Semitism? And something that I want to bring up that I think there's only been, has been a tremendous prevalence in and will only continue to be so, is online hate. And the internet is just explosive in ways that I will only assume, for the mental sanity of all participants, we're not even privy to. I mean, we're I'm not even talking the dark web, but Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, the mainstream sites have very heavy elements of anti-Semitic activity. And according to the ADL survey, 16% of Jews have experienced online harassment in 2017, and so I'd expect this number to have only increased since then. 4.2 million anti-Semitic posts were identified on Twitter. Unfortunately, and we're seeing more mainstreaming of this, the organization QAnon, which is heavily involved in online activities, is a right-wing conspiratorial organization that's focused on conspiracies of these great powers that are pulling the strings, have heavy anti-Semitic components to it, demonizing individuals like George Soros, with not subtle Jewish symbolism, and that is something that we only expect to see rise. There are several congressional candidates who won their respective primaries in the Republican primaries, who are QAnon candidates who've actively promoted QAnon conspiracies. We're only likely to see more of that, and just that is something that the ADL and I know other hate-fighting organizations are trying to work very closely with the technology companies out in California to develop more effective methods to stop the spread and the cultivation of anti-Semitism and other hateful messages in pockets where via anonymity and technology, bullying, harassment, and organization of anti-Semitism can take place.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Yeah, so that is a lot in 10 minutes. There you go.
Yes, you did a phenomenal job. Thank you so much. And now we are ready for questions on any aspect of the topic, which can be addressed by any or all of our panelists. Please put your questions into the chat. There are a few that I didn't get to from before, but let me just start with this question. What should Jews do when causes that they are committed to align themselves? What should Jews do when causes that they align themselves with have anti-Semitic elements? And any of our panelists can take that question.
Yeah, that's pretty difficult. First, I want to compliment Jonathan. I think the most important thing that was said tonight was what he talked about online. When you talk about anti-Semitic incidents, that's where they're skyrocketing, and most of us don't see any of that. So whatever can be done with that is really, really important. But yeah, when that happens, that's the problem with the extreme left being anti-Semitic, because at least among this crowd, probably most of us are pretty liberal. So you're in line with the overall goals of the liberal element, but then you've got this anti-Semitic component. And do you speak out about that or not? I think that has to be done very carefully, because you could get pummeled if you bring out that kind of concern publicly, or at least if you're doing it by yourself. If If you do it with a group, maybe it's more effective. But you have to say something. But it's very difficult because I think it tears up inside. So really deep, important question.
And if any other panelist wants to jump in on any of these questions, please do. Yes.
What may be behind that question, maybe people thinking about Black Lives Matter, because there certainly was in 2016, they had a statement of principles in which, it talked about Israel committing genocide. So I think that is a big question. I mean, in general, I think it's fine to work with people you disagree with as long as they don't deny your right to exist. I mean, we always, in any era of life, you work with people you don't agree with. I think it crosses the line when it, those 3 Ds, delegitimization, demonization, and double standards. But I would also say that the beautiful thing about the Jewish community, I mean, we all know that joke, when you have 2 Jews, you have at least 3 opinions. There are a variety of different Jewish organizations. So we don't all have to, there could be times when, the ADL is working with an organization and some other Jewish organization doesn't want to, or some Jewish organization on the far left is working with an organization and ADL or American Jewish Committee don't want to. That's fine. We have a rich Jewish ecosystem. And so we're never always going to be on the same page. And I think that that's sort of the nature. So what that means for each of us is we can stand by our convictions. If we're not comfortable going to a rally with an organization that doesn't espouse our values, then we shouldn't feel like we have to in order to be a good person. I think it's fine for us to stick by our convictions. None of us really speaks for all of Judaism. We have a rich Jewish ecosystem.
And I think a lot of that's going to depend on your comfort level and the relationships that you have there. Ideally, if you are working with someone or groups of people, and you establish credibility with those people through your good works, and through them getting to know you on a personal level, you'll be in a better position to engage them on issues of anti-Semitism or perceived anti-Semitism with more credibility than if you were an outsider or someone who didn't have a pre-existing relationship. But that's easier said than done.
Right. Oh, there's no question. The relationships are critical. I've got relationships with people that probably have very far different views, on Israel than I do, but, I can call them on the phone and, if there's a sensitive issue, for sure, those personal relationships are so critical.
Here's a more specific question. Do both Christians and Jews insufficiently object to treatment as dhimmis or worse in Muslim countries?
So for those of you who may not know the word dhimmi, it's I talk about it in the book a little bit. It's the religious legal name for Jews, the status of Jews in Muslim countries. It's a 2nd-tier status. The truth, yes, Jews are 2nd, 3rd-class citizens in the Arab world. I mean, that's why there are very, very few Jews that live, in any Arab country now. It used to be much more, but especially after 1967. I mean, there is still a small Jewish community in Iran. There's a very small Jewish community in Egypt, but I think it's not a very big deal because there's just such a small Jewish population that it's almost non-existent. It's not much of an issue because there's just not that many people affected by it.
Mm-hmm. I think this one might be for Dr. Moffic. Is anti-Semitism based on a feeling of inadequacy or more like white supremacy in the racial setting? It seems Jews are viewed as more powerful by anti-Semites. What is the correct psychological construct?
Well, I think there's several. I think it could be from scapegoating us for the problems the individual or the group has themselves, their sense of powerlessness. It could be envy of the Jews in our success. It could be that morality, that ethics that we try to get across that others don't necessarily want to live up to. So the motivation can be diverse underneath. So you can't really pinpoint it. Okay, this is one issue. If we can deal with this one issue, we'll solve the problem. You know, unfortunately, we've had this problem for thousands of years, which I think shows its depth and also its complexity. So I wish it was simpler.
Sort of related, is anti-Semitism from radical Muslim extremists more of a problem in Europe, like some of the violence committed in France, than compared to America?
Yes. Go ahead, Rabbi.
Yeah, France has been a very difficult, I think there's been a lot of violent anti-Semitism. And there's an interesting history to that. I mean, you look back the Dreyfus Affair, which was one of the paradigmatic incidents of modern anti-Semitism, where this colonel who was Jewish and had reached the very echelons of the French establishment was falsely accused of treason. So yeah, the interesting thing is, we once at my synagogue had the new German consul to the Midwest, who was based here in Chicago, came and spoke. And somebody asked him about anti-Semitism in Germany. And he's like, well, it's not us Germans that are the anti-Semites, you know, it's the immigrants. So it was like, it was kind of a hard thing to make sense of, because he was almost demonizing another group while defending Jews. So it's a very tricky balance to know where a lot of this anti-Semitism is coming from.
This is a question that was given earlier on. There are so many similarities with what's happening in Trump's America today and the Germany of the 1930s in the pre-Hitler years. And the person's question to that is, how can Jewish people support what's happening here? I'm not sure what's meant by the question, but go ahead.
You know, again, I'm kind of a glass half full kind of guy, even though I wrote a book about the world's oldest hatred. I think the difference, certainly there's a huge increase in anti-Semitism. I mean, that's why I wrote the book. We all know that. I think the difference is, in 1930s Germany, anti-Semitism became legal government policy. I mean, increasingly, it happened slowly. So this wasn't, but it was legal. I mean, Jews could not employ Christian housewives. Jewish businesses couldn't operate at certain hours. So it was all legally created. And remember, Germany was, as we talked about before with Hitler's willing executioners, there was a anti-Semitism that was imbibed in the church. So we don't have those factors in America. We certainly don't have legalized anti-Semitism. And we don't have this history of hardcore anti-Semitism. That being said, yes, there is certainly the same kind of anti-outsider feeling, you know, that permeated Germany in the 1930s, and not just Germany, permeated a lot of the world. You know, the recession and so on, I mean, the Great Depression. So I do think that there are elements of that, and I think that's why we have to speak out.
So I'm going to close this question and answer period with what we used to call in the old days the $64 million question. I don't think $64 million is a big deal anymore, but if each of you could just concisely suggest one idea, what do you see as the most effective way or ways to, one, prevent anti-Semitism, and two, to deal with it when it occurs? So I think you have suggested many answers, but perhaps you can give us a takeaway here. We'll start with you, Rabbi.
Well, a very practical thing is you could buy my book and give it to a friend. You know.
Okay, here we go.
No, I think one of the great things that I think is to live more proudly as Jews. You know, when we are proud of our Jewish heritage and can talk about it and confidently speak about it with others, I think we reduce anti-Semitism. I think we don't need to shy away from it. I think speaking, living as Jews, inviting Christian friends to a synagogue, having seders, inviting people of other religions, Christians and Muslims, I think doing that outreach, that is really, from my perspective, is really one of the keys. That's what I would urge us all to do more of.
Oh, wonderful. Dr. Moffic?
So I'm probably more, from my professional, a glass half empty
Empty.
than Rabbi Moffic. I think probably the thing I would emphasize the most, once again, is to make anti-Semitism a priority for ourselves. We need to tikkun olam for ourselves. I think we underplay the issue. It's very frightening. It is increasing. I wouldn't say it's anything like Nazi Germany, as the rabbi said. I think that comes up because our politics are so different. That's our only reference point to try to understand it. But I think we have to put more priority on dealing with anti-Semitism, recognizing it, and veer a little bit away from our tikkun olam for other people.
Thank you. Jonathan?
Education and engagement. You know, you educate children and others on anti-bias and on anti-Semitism, how to identify it, how to respond to it. You engage with other communities so that the Jew is not the other, but the Jew is their neighbor. And I would add, and I saw there was a question we didn't get to, just to put a finer point on it, I think Holocaust education is incredibly important. And the question was why the 90s were a golden age. And my personal thesis is that was really the high point of celebration of the World War II generation. And the Holocaust wasn't a history lesson. It was my Bubby and Zadie, or the veterans who, you know, the Gentiles who fought as in the US military to liberate the camps and to liberate Europe. And that living history, I think, contributed, along with winning a Cold War and other more complicated issues, to lessening anti-Semitism. And now that generation, unfortunately, but realistically, is largely gone with certain exceptions. And as the Holocaust recedes into the history books, we need to keep those lessons alive so that it remains relevant to others.
Great, thank you. I'll just give a final comment that Jenny Russell gave us. I can't wait until we can safely gather. I'll definitely have some non-Jewish friends over for Pesach or other celebrations. I want to express a most sincere thank you to our panelists, Dr. Evan Moffic, Rabbi Evan Moffic, Dr. Stephen Moffic, and Jonathan Krause for giving us greater insight into this troubling topic. I think I can safely say that all three of you have added richly to our knowledge, to our seeing the complexity of the topic, and perhaps to seeing some solutions. If you have questions that we did not have time to address this evening, Jerry will forward them to the panel. And if, and I'll repeat, if the panel can, they will get back to you sometime in the future through email. I want to thank Jerry for doing such a great job as our tech angel. The evaluation.
My pleasure. And here's the link, although I also put it in the chat, but this is what please, everybody, even the people from Milwaukee.
Yes.
And Chicago, Highland Park, wherever you're from.
Okay, so there we go for the evaluation. For those of you who wish to continue discussing the topic, we will continue the Zoom room for another 15 minutes or so with Jerry as our tech angel to oversee that. Thank you all, and Congregation Rodef Shalom wishes everyone in Philadelphia, in Milwaukee, in Chicago, and elsewhere a safe, healthy, and a very sweet new year. Shana Tova.
And we need to thank Elaine for doing a fabulous moderating job, really.
So, Jerry, how do we go about just continuing in the chat room? And panelists, if you wish to stay, we'd love to have you.
People can unmute themselves and they can just start talking, and no rules.
Okay. Anybody?
But you have to unmute yourself if you want to say something.
Just speak up, because we didn't do hands tonight. Okay.
Does anybody?
Unmute yourself if you want to speak.
Sidavi, are you speaking?
Yes, does anybody want to share personal experiences that they witness of anti-Semitism? If they feel comfortable?
All
I'm
right.
happy to speak up here. This is Brent Arnold from Congregation Shalom. I actually work in the construction industry, which, often is, especially in Milwaukee, is a community that is not very affluent of the Jewish traditions and cultures at all. And so there have been times often where I have been talking to a subcontractor and they have used the term that I was going to try to Jew them down. That's come up several times to me in my career. And I'll be honest, when I was younger in my career, I just bit my tongue and sucked it up and, thought differently, but I was afraid to say something. And in the last 15 years, and, learning and growing as a person, I've learned that you can never stand silent. And so I've learned, when you see something, say something. And I will never let anything like that go by me ever again. And I am, make people aware I'm Jewish, that, what they're saying is, anti-Semitic and racist, and it's not that I won't be doing business with people that feel the way they feel.
And what do they say when you call them on it, Brent? How do they respond?
In shock, I think. I think it gets very uncomfortable after that point. But I think you have to look at it as a way to educate people. It's not really just about the shock and awe factor. It's about finding ways to realize that you've known me for the last 3 years now, and now you're just finding out that I'm Jewish. And you may have felt the way you did. And to be honest, there's a lot of people that have never, ever met a Jewish person in their life. And so I think that's part of the problem is when you meet someone and you're friends with someone knowing that they're Jewish, that changes your perspective of Jewish people. And it's prejudices. It's people have been, either taught by their parents or by others that, for whatever prejudices that they believe in, without knowing, the truth or ever meeting a Jewish person. So
It's interesting. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Brent, if you're not.
No, it's a journey. I think, I try to teach my people, I teach my kids, that the day you stop learning is the day you die. And I try to hold me to that standard, but I try to hold everybody around me to that standard, is to just continually educating people.
I just wanted to comment that the way Rabbi Moffic's book is constructed is that after each chapter, he has a reaction from someone who might be in the church, might be a Muslim. Just, how did you feel about what you read? And that very kind of situation arises. A church person is meeting with another church person, and one of them says, yes, I Jewed them down on on the price. And the first church person says, I am so surprised to hear you use that term. That's totally inconsistent with what we should be doing. So I think it's not uncommon and good for the people who speak up. So,
and I even believe that there are people that say that without even really realizing that it's racist,
right,
or that it's
or even thinking about the words. Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if I missed some of this lecture, so I apologize. But people say, I got gypped. Well, the truth is that is also racist and came from the gypsies, and I don't know how many people actually know that.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah.
Can we, any other questions? And thank you for your question, Sidavi, and for your contribution, Brent.
Yeah.
Any
So
other questions? Howard?
Yes. Actually, as an aside, I grew up in Philadelphia, but presently live in Milwaukee, a member of Congregation Shalom. And I was a graduate of Central High School many, many years ago.
Okay.
Very. I'm concerned about the anti-Semitism on the campuses. And I follow closely the university that I went to, an Ivy League school that had a motto, in the nation's service. And they send a lot of people to government service. They did when I was a student there, and they continue to send a number of people to the government. Several people on the Supreme Court are Princeton graduates, and there are other people in the government. The amount of anti-Semitism that's present on that campus is marked. It's tremendous. And it's much more than when I went there. When I went there, it was the usual anti-Semitism. There were certain clubs you couldn't get into. There were certain medical schools or law schools you didn't apply to. But now it's pervasive to the point where the deputy foreign minister of Israel, there were pickets that she couldn't speak at the Hillel. Eventually she spoke at the Shabbat house there. But the amount of problems that are occurring, and frankly, it's mostly initiated by very progressive groups. Many of them are Jewish. Jews for progressive this or that are promoting the BDS on the campus. So I would just like to hear our
I talk a lot about that. That's why that quote from Larry Summers I thought was really illustrative, that you can be anti-Semitic in effect, if not in intent. So the people, the progressive Jews who are saying the deputy foreign minister shouldn't speak on campus, many of them actually think they're doing good. They think they're actually serving a higher cause, but it's anti-Semitic. It's targeting Israel. So this is where it's very. You have to really understand where it's coming from. This is not the typical kind. I mean, when we think about anti-Semitism in America, typically we think about Father Coughlin and Pat Buchanan and David Duke and these sort of these people that were terrible racists, the Ku Klux Klan, and that is the sort of traditional anti-Semitism. And I think that over the last 20 years, you've seen this new kind of anti-Semitism, although they wouldn't really, in many ways, they would say, we love Jews, and we love diversity. So it's just a unique situation. I mean, this is some of the dangers, I would say, of intersectionality. I have a lot of discussion about intersectionality in my book, that when we start to define people based on victimhood, then it inevitably leads to some kind of anti-Semitism, because Jews don't fit in the traditional boxes.
Rabbi,
yeah,
I'm old enough to remember the anti-Semitism in the State Department.
Oh, yeah.
In the State Department during World War II and the St. Louis and the whole scene. And the more this kind of new anti-Semitism pervades into the government, it's far more dangerous than these hate groups that the Jews have dealt with.
I think you're right. And you know what I think is really interesting? I think the kind of traditional anti-Semitism you saw at Princeton, you know, the eating clubs and the co-op buildings in New York and Chicago where Jews couldn't live, I think that, people may disagree with me on this, I think that's virtually gone. I just read an article about a guy running for Congress in Boston from Newton who's Jewish, but he's married into like the family of Jackie Kennedy and Gore Vidal, you know, the bluest of the blue bloods. And this guy's Jewish, and his family, you know, and think of like, you know, the Clintons and the Trumps and like these sort of very elites of American society all have Jewish members of their families. I mean, Jews have reached the establishment, the traditional American establishment, the kind of thing at the Princeton eating clubs. So that, even though there's still a little bit, you know, I mean, there's always some, but that kind of anti-Semitism is minimal. It's the other kind of anti-Semitism that we see much more of.
I'd like to say something about that. It is a very big problem on campuses, and there was a question not really presented, what can we do as individuals? There are organizations, I'll just name one, Stand With Us, very, very large around the world, on campuses and even high schools. The lower you get and the sooner you nip it in the bud, the better. I say this as a person whose uncles came up again, my father came up against the Jewish quota, which some of you may know or remember, which I don't think is there anymore. But that was on campuses, and there's a new thing on campuses today. There are ways we can participate, either get involved with organizations like Stand With Us, there's others, or just send them money if that's all you can do.
I think that's really important, and we shouldn't forget about the faculty on these campuses. The left faculty who are Jewish are part of this problem, so they need to be reached too. I just want to go on my high horse because this is another opportunity to do this. You know, I think we're in potentially a golden age still for Jews. We got a strong Israel, and we still have a strong diaspora. I think criticism of Israel needs to really be muted because it's a divide and conquer kind of thing if we're too critical of Israel. I don't even think we know what's going on there well enough to criticize, but I think that's a dangerous practice. We need to work together and maintain our strength.
Thank you. I think we have time for one or two more comments or questions. Please unmute yourself and ask your question. Anyone?
They didn't do it earlier.
We're still unmuted.
Okay.
I would like to make a note.
All right, Ken, please.
I find it very difficult today, and I am bothered by the labels that we're having. You can be a good Jew, whether you are a Democrat, whether you are a Republican, whether you are a conservative, or you are very liberal. And we're taking sides amongst ourselves. And by taking sides amongst ourselves, we are being anti-Semitic, whether we realize it or not. And we have to teach that and push that you are not wrong. We may disagree. Get rid of the labels. I think that's very dangerous as Jews.
Well said. Well said.
I've noticed that
Who's speaking? Marcia?
This is Barbara Pressman speaking, but does someone else want to speak?
Okay, Barbara.
I would suggest that we encourage more social media.
We can't hear you too well.
Can you hear me better now?
Yes, much better. Thank you.
Okay. The acceptance of same-sex marriages and the acceptance of biracial marriages have been preceded by television programs showing those social conditions. And I've noticed that there are a lot of commercials on television now showing biracial families. I would suggest that we do what we can to have TV programs that show Jewish families, Jewish neighbors in a positive light. Just the way the rabbi said relationships are important. not everyone can have a Jewish friend or neighbor. They may live somewhere where Jews are not present, but they do have television sets, and these friends and these relationships can be established that way. To see us as human beings with the same kind of problems and ideas and joys that they have, and then we become human beings rather than stereotypes.
All right, thank you. Recently, Road of Shalom had a whole program on TV reflecting Jewish programming on TV, ending with the marvelous Mrs. Maisel. For myself, I often feel that these programs depict Jews in a way that I'm not very proud of. I almost wish they wouldn't have these programs, but perhaps if we could do what Barbara, get the TV people to do what Barbara has suggested, present Jews in an appealing way, kind of like I remember Mrs. Goldberg. Some of you older folks may remember. That would be great. Some other contributions, questions. Alan Daniel?
Yeah, I'd like to take a minute to read something I wrote at the end of the formal session. It has a few parts to it. One is, what can we learn from the rise of demagogues in the 20th century? The second is, are the increasing hardship and inequality of wealth in this country and worldwide and the fading memory of the Holocaust important factors in the recent upsurge? The third part, an educator in your session on grandparenting this afternoon said the most important factor in raising a child is a coherent worldview at home. Might not it be important in addressing anti-Semitism, racism, as well as divisiveness at home, to teach that real diversity means understanding ourselves and others to be unique, special, and valued? And the last sentiment, I think, is in harmony with what Barbara was saying, too.
Rabbi, did you want to reply to that?
No, that was great. I think it's really important to reaffirm. You know, a lot of the hatred begins at home, and if we can teach good values in our homes, and pop culture does have an enormous impact on how Jews are perceived and how people of different religions and races are perceived. And I think that the more we can depict Jews in a positive light, the better, no question.
I would agree too. You know, I hate to throw this out to probably an economically comfortable group, but I think capitalism has been running amok in the United States. And we've got so much disparity between the lower levels of the population economically and the upper levels. We've got climate change going on, which relates to a certain aspect of capitalism. We got racism. I think some controls, I don't think there's anything in essence wrong with capitalism itself, but I think it's hurt some of the development now in the United States and leading to some of our big current and future problems. So I would just keep that in mind.
Can I say something else?
I have some.
I'd like to throw out a question to people. I like to read Bret Stephens a lot, formerly of the Wall Street Journal, now of the New York Times. He wrote a very interesting column in the New York Times several months ago, maybe a better part of a year ago. And he said, the New York Times has a Jewish problem. They haven't been right for Jews since World War II and FDR era. Anybody have a comment or a thought on that? And that applies to other similar newspapers.
And I will remind everyone that Barry Weiss recently resigned from the New York Times, pretty much for that reason. Responses, replies, thoughts?
I mean, I think that that's true in some ways. I mean, it represents a certain Jewish viewpoint, you know, a kind of a very, in some ways, kind of similar to what my dad said, a certain kind of class. In some ways, these are somewhat class issues, a very high liberal viewpoint. that doesn't represent the comprehensive view of the Jewish community and the role of the Jewish community. I think it's a little unfair to kind of draw a straight line from like Holocaust era reporting to today, because I mean, we know the New York Times buried the Holocaust, in its pages. I mean, that's indisputable. So I think the motivations may be different, but I do think that, I think it's even a bigger problem. I think it's a problem with diversity of opinion. I think in some ways the news world is so fractured now that every paper, there's really no such thing as objective journalism anymore. Every paper, every TV station has its own point of view. And it's hard to discern, we all get caught in our own eco bubbles. We all, on Facebook, we get a Facebook feed of our friends. We can choose the websites that we go to. So we often don't get a multiplicity of opinions. And I think if somebody just reads the New York Times, they're not getting the whole story. They should read the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, and then maybe a local paper. You got to multiply the sources.
Dr. Moffic said that he thought it was important to mute the criticism of Israel a bit. Do I have that right, Doctor?
I'm afraid you do.
Huh?
I'm afraid you do have it right.
Okay, so here is a comment from one of our congregants. Israel's participation in heinous crimes against Palestinians fuels uninformed leftists. Progressive Jews have to speak out in opposition to Israel's occupation, as well as call the leftists on this important distinction between being anti-Israel government and anti-Jewish. Would anybody like to reply to that?
I'll say something if you want me to.
I guess I'll elaborate what I mean there. Then we'll get to you. I think the problem with Israel and Palestinians is not between Israel and Palestinians. I think it's a broader issue. I think it's between Israel and Iran and some of the other countries around them who really don't want Israel to exist. And I think that's where the problem needs to be addressed, ultimately speaking. But again, I think it's tricky to distinguish between anti-Israel and anti-Semitism. It's a slippery issue, and I think we got to be careful about not doing anything that could lead to the destruction of Israel.
Mm-hmm. Rabbi, is the Rabbi still here?
Yeah.
Where are you? Oh, there you are. Would you like to reply to that?
What was the exact comment? It was anti-Jewish first. I didn't quite hear it well.
I'm going to read it again. Israel's participation in heinous crimes against Palestinians fuels uninformed leftists. Progressive Jews have to speak out in opposition to Israel's occupation, as well as call the leftists on this important distinction between being anti-Israel government and anti-Jewish.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair criticism. I do think that I think people can disagree or agree on crimes towards Palestinians. I certainly think there are some absolutely questionable crimes, and I don't know if I would use the word heinous, but I'm not opposed to using it if somebody wants to. And I think that the person who wrote that is absolutely right to say that it can fuel uninformed people, and that it's important for Jews to address the reality, to say, the Israeli government is not perfect, and it behooves nobody to pretend that it is. I wrote my honors thesis in college about Louis Brandeis, the first Jewish Supreme Court justice, and Brandeis was he was a very strong Zionist. But he had a very idealized version of what Israel would look like. He believed there would be no Jewish police and no Jewish prisons because Jews would never commit crimes. I mean, he had this absolutely like a Jewish Disneyland, and he was wrong. And I think sometimes we tend to have that, and we should recognize Israel is a state with corruption, with problems, with just the normal things. We're all human beings. And so we shouldn't expect Israel to be perfect. And we should feel comfortable calling out normal issues. It's those 3 Ds that we have to be careful of. And we also have to educate people that Israel is a state. It is a normal state. It's not going to be perfect, but it is what it has achieved, its ideals. I mean, we have so much to be proud of, and we should really, I mean, talk about that. I mean, Israel, you know, you always have to ask, compared to what Israel as a country is so enormously successful and modern and progressive in every single way. And I think emphasizing that is our job.
But we can't forget the settlements at the same time. And the settlements being illegal. And that is making a lot of the left gather around those kinds of issues. And unless we prepare our students in confirmation class and even earlier to address those issues, then they're going into universities totally unprepared for that kind of attack on Israel and their faith.
I know it is. You're absolutely right. And the tricky thing is the balance between I mean, as I think as a congregational rabbi, I only see these kids a couple hours a week, if that. Mostly, you know, they've got a zillion other activities. These kids, and so, how much time do we spend sort of telling the story of Israel and kind of reinforcing ideals versus talking about problems? And you know, it's hard to get that right mix. But you know, I think you're right.
But if we just tell them the good things about Israel and don't prepare them for some of the criticism and how to address and understand that criticism, then when they go into the university world, they're just shocked and demoralized and shamed.
Yeah,
and we need to help them address those issues.
And we can always count on the press to talk about those issues 3,000 times more than the issues in any other country, which is committing all kinds of offenses. But we won't hear about them in the press.
Right. Exactly.
But we have to do what we can to stand up against the illegal settlements, against taking people's homes, against destroying people's olive trees and everything else. And if we don't stand up against that, what kind of Jews are we?
I think as Jews, we should also understand that we're sitting here in the United States, and the Israeli people who understand these issues a little bit more have made their decisions. And to call them illegal settlements is an opinion, not a fact. And to call them heinous crimes is an opinion, not a fact. That's another discussion which could take hours and days. I don't want to try to present a case. Just to make sure everybody's aware, there is a case and you won't find it in the mainstream press.
Okay.
Thank
you.
I think
I have to run. I got to
Yes,
run.
I was just, thank you. Thank you
so much.
again. It's approaching 10 o'clock. I think we're going to call it a night.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Alice.
Thank you so much, everybody. Remember, you can submit your questions to Jerry through email, and he will send them to our panelists, and if they have time, they may reply to you in the future. Thank you. Good night. Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
Mohan, you did better than I.
Anybody still there?
I am, but I'm shutting things down. You want to say something? You have a burning comment?
Yeah, I do.
Go ahead, I'll listen.
The question is about Jewish identity. And I think our younger generation are getting a lot less Jewish identity, and they're criticizing Jewish positions, particularly vis-a-vis Israel, and that's part of the problem. And they're not joining congregations. They're unaffiliated, and yes, they were brought up Jewish. Some of them are having bar mitzvahs, bat mitzvahs. Some of them aren't, and some of our grandkids aren't getting Jewish educations. So there's a diminution in Jewish identity, And with that comes a diminution in Jewish strength and our ability to resist these discriminations. So,
but I think I don't think what you said is different now than it's been for, dozens and dozens of years. It's always been an issue. A lot of kids don't get Jewish education. It sometimes skips 1 or 2 or 3 generations and comes back. People intermarry. I know at Road of Shalom, we've got, like 24 people in a conversion class all the time. It's amazing. If you come to our synagogue, it looks like the UN. We got every shade of skin there. It's quite remarkable. So I can only tell you, from my point of view, that our synagogue really is working hard to be accepting and offer lots of different opinions, but also making it so welcoming that people feel comfortable, marrying other people and bringing them into the synagogue and so it's not. I don't think it's a hopeless cause. I could see, depending on where you're from or what you see, that it might, the glass might seem half empty, but I'm hopeful. I'm really amazed at what I see in my congregation. So, which one are you from?
we're at Shalom in Wisconsin.
Which one?
The Congregation Shalom.
Oh, Dr. Moffic Synagogue.
Yes.
Yeah. So you don't see what I described?
No, I do, and I know that and I know people who have become very orthodox who grew up, quite reform or even less. I hate to use it. I don't think that's quite the right word, but
I know what you mean. But it goes around in cycles. I have a friend who was very medium, and she her son became super Orthodox, went to Israel, got turned off by that, came back. Now he's like middle of the road. So it just there's no pattern. You just can't tell where people are going ahead. I'm always amazed at seeing kids who, I used to teach Hebrew school. I was a Hebrew school director, and I thought that a lot of the kids were hopeless, and this one's an assistant to the director of the Hebrew school. This one's teaching Hebrew school. This one's in rabbinical school. 3 girls became cantors. It's like shocking. So we just don't know. I have to believe that we'll always be around. They can't get rid of us. We'll always be around. So, Elaine, you're still there. Now you're Steve. She's mute. Elaine, can you hear me? No, I think she has.
well, this was excellent tonight.
Well, thank you so much. It was really great. It was really great to have another state. Or I hope you're I hope you're going to. Oh, Elaine, you're back. Elaine?
Steve, I can't hear. Some people are still on. Jerry's still on. I can't hear
It's
him.
basically just Edwin from Milwaukee and me.
Because I'm unmuted.
and you.
Let me tell you.
Yeah.
I grew up in Omaha. I entered Philadelphia.
So did the cantor from my other synagogue.
The whole thing. Here, let me show you.
So what were you saying about?
I entered in Philadelphia Graduate Hospital.
Wait, what was the beginning of the sentence?
I grew up in Omaha.
Right.
Nebraska. Interned at Graduate Hospital in Philadelphia.
You interned, did you say?
Yeah, I'm a retired ophthalmologist.
Oh, wow. So you interned at Graduate Hospital?
Yeah.
Wow.
That's 19th and Lombard,
It's not. It doesn't exist anymore. It's a. I believe it's a. I don't think it's a nursing. I think it's a nursing facility now. Yeah, it used to be part of Penn, but Penn dropped that building, but Penn bought up, like half the city now. There are Penn Medicine buildings like all over the place, but Graduate Hospital. What?
Because Penn was always around 34th.
No, it's everywhere. It's unbelievable. First of all, University of Pennsylvania is the largest employer in the whole city.
Wow.
Second, you can walk every 3 blocks, you will see Penn Medicine. You will see one building where my heart doctor is, my cardiologist, another Penn Medicine where my eye doctor is, another Penn Medicine where my urologist is. It's unbelievable. They have buildings all over, and now they opened up a whole flight, a whole slew of what do you call urgent care? You know, so they're everywhere. It's really incredible. You should Google Penn Medicine. You will be shocked at how much they've taken over the city. It's crazy. So not only do they have the building at 34th and Spruce, which was the original, they own Presbyterian Hospital. They own they just kept they own Pennsylvania Hospital, which used to be a separate hospital. So it's really remarkable.
IOB at Pennsylvania Hospital. That was the first hospital in the United States.
That's right. And that's where I go for a lot of, if I had procedures, I go there. I live right down the street from it. So I'm very proud. Right next door to it is the first Jewish cemetery in Philadelphia.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, Mikveh Israel, 1740.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's my neighborhood hospital.
Oh.
So and Milwaukee, I have close friends who don't live there anymore, but one of them used to be I think he was the head of the Board of Jewish Education in Whitefish Bay, which I thought was like the most fabulous name for a Jewish neighborhood you can come up with. I mean, it's like, other than like Bagels and Locks Bay, Whitefish Bay is
Whitefish Bay, but
what?
Whitefish Bay isn't all that Jewish, but it. Well,
it was. I think it was like 25. Was it in the 80s? Wasn't it Jewish? Because that's where we had this Jewish conference. So I assumed that it was a Jewish suburb.
Well, no? They're Jews there. I don't think it's all that Jewish, but it's they're certainly Whitefish Bay, Fox Point, Bayside, Mequon are more of the Jewish areas. But I live in Bayside. I'd say maybe 20% of the population or 15%. I don't know what, but something like that, Jewish.
Well, Milwaukee's beautiful. I've been there, a few times, and really nice. So is Racine. I've been there to see the Johnson Wax Building.
Yeah.
And Manitowoc. And where else have I been? Oh, Frank Lloyd Wright. What am I thinking of?
Right.
What's the town called?
I don't know.
Oh my God, where his school? Where his school?
Frank Lloyd Wright was here, and there's a lot of work that he's done here, and in Chicago,
Oh yeah, I know. I was going to be an architect, so I know all about the. But
what you're talking about? You're talking about north of Madison. There's he has.
It was a school.
Yeah.
Oh my God. And there's another one in Arizona. Wait, here we go.
In Scottsdale.
Here we go.
It's I've got a block too.
Here we go. I'm looking it up because I won't be able to sleep.
I've got it's.
Oh my God! Wait a minute. Oh my God! Spring Green, not Spring Green.
It's
Elder Sullivan, Shrewsbury, Steinway, Prairie Style, Oak Park. Oh my God! I can't believe I can't think of it.
I
Taliesin.
And in Phoenix, it's Taliesin West.
Right.
We winter in Phoenix.
So, oh my God, that's so cool.
So this is our main home here, but.
Oh, very nice, very nice.
About going back next winter. I don't know with this COVID business.
It's crazy.
It's crazy.
Really,
I don't
really crazy.
Well,
I hope you get to go back there, and as the president says, we're turning the corner. Any minute, we're going to turn the corner. I think he thinks that the light at the end of the tunnel. He doesn't know that it's another train.
I had a number of thoughts on this thing too, in terms of somebody was talking about being Jewed, and I'd heard that a number of years ago. I haven't heard it for a long time, but it's not uncommon for Jews to talk about Schwarzes. Now, the word Schwarze, all that means is
black. It means black, yeah.
But it is, I guess, a slur.
I have not heard that word. When you just said it, I think that was the first time I have heard it in like 10 years. Honest to God, I don't hear that anymore.
We never thought of it terribly negatively, and it was common for black housekeepers for Jews to have a black person come in and clean their house once a week or once every other week or whatever. And it's my Schwarze that comes on Tuesday.
Yeah.
And nobody ever thought that was calling him a bad name.
Well, it's like Goyim. It's like Goyim just means nations. And,
yes.
And, you're only talking about, the non-Jews or the Goyim. It's not necessarily a negative thing, although people use it as a negative. But I'll just tell you a quick story. When I used to teach in mathematics in the suburbs of Philly, in a neighborhood that a lot of people think it's kind of like Whitefish Bay. People think that it's all Jewish, but it's really not. So the town is divided into three parts. You got the low-class, low-element Catholic neighborhood, the wealthy Protestant neighborhood with the big mansions, and then you got the Jews who all live in one apartment building. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but that's pretty close to the reality that all the Jews are in this fortress called Beaver Hill Apartments. So I taught in the high school for that town. The town is only 1 square mile. It's like one of the small school districts in the United States. The state of Pennsylvania has been trying to get them to merge with the adjacent school districts to no avail. So the high school that I taught in was 500 kids. That was all the high school kids in the town. So when I first arrived at the school and I opened up my closet, there were swastikas all over inside the closet. Now that wasn't directed at me because I just got there. It was a previous teacher who used that room who was Jewish. Then I started getting things written on my car, not in ink, luckily, but in the dirt, swastikas, Heil Hitler, fuck Jews, and then something that looked like a bomb that was left on my desk that had some anti-Semitic writing on it. So I was complaining to the principal and the superintendent, and nobody was doing anything about it. So I finally went to the superintendent's office, and I said, listen, this is nuts. Something's got to be done about it. And he said, I don't know why you're all upset. It's only an ancient Indian symbol. When I went, and we're talking about 1972, 73. So I went at something like, you have no idea, you don't understand, I got written up, unsatisfactory incident, because I raised my voice and pointed at him. That was 1973. So, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I got to go. I haven't eaten dinner yet. It was great talking. You're an hour earlier, right? You're 9:15?
Yes, we are.
Yeah, well, it's 10:15. I got to go eat. was great having you. Thank you for joining us.
And nice talking to you.
Thanks for staying on. Really pleasure to wrap up with you.
Thank you
Be
very
well.
much.
Stay safe. Shana Tova.
Enjoy your dinner.
Bye.
And Happy New Year.
Thank you. Same to you and your congregation. Bye-bye.
Bye.